People are taught very early that being alone is something to escape from. Not questioned, not examined, just avoided. Silence is treated like an enemy, solitude like a failure, and most people never stop to ask why. They just accept the rule. If you are alone for too long, something must be wrong with you. If you enjoy your own company, something must be missing. This belief is so deeply embedded that it feels natural, almost biological. But it is. It's learned. And like most learned beliefs, it serves someone else's interests, not yours. Think about how quickly discomfort appears when there is no noise, no notifications, no conversation, no distraction. The mind immediately looks for an escape, a screen, a voice, a task, anything to avoid that quiet presence with oneself. Society praises this reflex, calls it productivity, calls it being connected. But what it really is training. Training you to never sit still long enough to notice what you actually feel, what you actually think, what you actually want. Because the moment you do, control begins to weaken. Baltasar Gracian understood this centuries ago. He warned that the crowd is not wise and that the one who depends on it loses himself. To be constantly surrounded is not strength, it is exposure. When you are always among others, you are always adjusting, performing, filtering. You become a version of yourself that fits expectations. Over time, you forget where the performance ends and where you begin. Solitude threatens this system because in solitude, there is no audience, no approval to chase, no mask to maintain. This is why society praises constant togetherness but quietly punishes independence. The person who can stand alone does not rush, does not beg, does not conform easily. They are harder to influence because their center is internal. They don't need agreement to feel real. They don't need validation to feel whole. And that is dangerous to any structure built on persuasion, comparison, and fear of exclusion. A person at ease with solitude cannot be pushed as easily as a person who fears it. Notice how loneliness and solitude are deliberately confused. Loneliness is made to represent all forms of aloneness, even though they are opposites. Loneliness is emptiness. Solitude is fullness. Loneliness is craving. Solitude is clarity. But by blending the two, society ensures you never experiment long enough to discover the difference for yourself. You flee at the first discomfort, believing you are protecting yourself, when in reality you are running from the very ground where self-mastery begins. Gracian wrote that the wise man knows when to withdraw, not out of bitterness, not out of weakness, but out of understanding. Distance sharpens perception. Silence refines judgment. When you are alone, you are no longer borrowing opinions. You are no longer reacting. You begin to see patterns instead of noise, motives instead of appearances, yourself instead of reflections. And once you experience this even briefly, something irreversible happens. You realize that being alone is not a lack. It is a position of strength that most people never occupy long enough to recognize. Most people don't realize that fear of being alone is not accidental, it is cultivated. It is reinforced quietly through habits, expectations, and subtle social pressure. From an early age, you are rewarded for fitting in, for staying visible, for being available. The message is never spoken directly, but it is felt everywhere. If you disappear for too long, questions arise. If you pull back, concern appears. If you choose distance, suspicion follows. Society does not trust the individual who does not constantly signal belonging, because belonging makes people predictable. When you are always surrounded, you are always influenced. Opinions shape you before you can test them. Emotions spread before you can name them. Desires are borrowed before you can question whether they are yours. Gracian warned that the crowd dulls discernment. In numbers, people feel powerful, but they think less clearly. Alone, the opposite happens. Weakness is exposed first, yes, but so is truth. And truth takes time. Time that constant interaction steals from you without asking. This is why solitude feels uncomfortable at first. Not because it is harmful, but because it removes anesthesia. The mind, no longer distracted, begins to surface unresolved thoughts, regrets you avoided, questions you postponed, doubts you buried under noise. Most people interpret this discomfort as danger. They assume something is wrong and rush back to stimulation. But this reaction is exactly what keeps them shallow. Depth always begins with discomfort. Clarity is never immediate. Solitude tests patience, and patience is something modern life actively erodes. Gracian believed that self-knowledge is power, but only if it is earned. You do not discover yourself through constant reaction. You discover yourself through observation. Alone, you begin to notice how quickly your mind seeks approval, how often it imitates, how easily it fears standing apart. These realizations are humbling. They strip away illusions of independence, but they also give you something rare: choice. Once you see your patterns, you are no longer enslaved by them. You can pause. You can decide. You can act deliberately instead of reflexively. There is a reason people who master solitude appear calm under pressure. They are not empty when things fall quiet. They are not restless when attention fades. They have already faced themselves without witnesses. They do not panic when external support weakens because their foundation is internal. Society prefers urgency, noise, reaction. Solitude builds composure, silence, response. And these qualities do not serve systems that rely on impulse and distraction. They serve the individual. That is why solitude is tolerated in theory, but discouraged in practice. Gracian understood that withdrawal is not escape, it is strategy. To step back is to see the board clearly. To remain alone long enough is to hear your own judgment without interference. And once that judgment strengthens, you stop moving according to pressure. You move according to principle. This is the shift society quietly resists, because a person guided by principle does not follow trends blindly. They cannot be rushed easily. They are no longer dependent on the noise to feel alive, and that independence changes everything. There is a moment in solitude that most people never reach because they leave too soon. It comes after the restlessness, after the mental noise, after the urge to fill the space with something familiar. If you remain, if you do not escape, something subtle begins to shift. The mind slows. The thoughts lose their urgency. What once felt unbearable starts to feel neutral, then strangely clear. This is the threshold where solitude stops feeling like absence and starts revealing itself as presence. Baltasar Gracian emphasized that clarity is rare because few are willing to endure stillness long enough to achieve it. In solitude, you are no longer reacting to the world as it appears. You are observing it as it is. Without constant social feedback, your identity loosens its grip. You notice how much of your personality has been shaped by approval, resistance, imitation. Alone, these forces weaken. You are not required to defend yourself, not required to impress, not required to explain. And in that freedom, something essential begins to emerge. This is where judgment sharpens, not the judgment of others, but discernment. You begin to sense when something is false, even if it is popular. You begin to feel when something is wrong, even if it is rewarded. Gracian warned that the greatest deception is collective enthusiasm. When many agree, doubt disappears. Solitude restores doubt, and doubt restores intelligence. It allows you to step back from momentum and ask whether movement itself makes sense. Most never ask this question because they are too busy keeping up. Notice how rare it is to meet someone who does not rush to speak, who does not fill silence out of anxiety, who does not fear pauses in conversation. These people often intimidate without trying. Their presence feels grounded, self-contained. This is not charisma learned from performance. It is composure earned through solitude. They are not calculating reactions. They are responding from a place that does not depend on immediate validation. That steadiness is the result of spending time alone without collapsing inward. Gracian believed that self-mastery begins where external influence ends. In solitude, you begin to separate necessity from habit. You realize how many desires were never yours, how many opinions were adopted for safety, how many goals were pursued for appearance. This realization can be unsettling. It destabilizes the story you tell yourself about who you are. But instability is not weakness, it is transition. It is the space between illusion and truth. Those who flee this space remain predictable. Those who endure it become precise. This is why solitude refines character. It removes excess. It strips away performative urgency. You stop needing to prove you exist. You start knowing it. And when this knowing settles, your actions change. You speak less, but with weight. You choose more carefully. You waste less energy seeking confirmation. Society cannot rush you once this happens. It can tempt, distract, provoke, but it cannot command you easily. You have touched something internal that does not require reinforcement. And once touched, it cannot be unseen. Once solitude reshapes your inner posture, your relationship with others begins to change in ways most people never anticipate. You become less reactive, less eager to please, less afraid of disapproval. Not because you have grown cold, but because you are no longer negotiating your worth in every interaction. Gracian warned that dependence weakens judgment, and nowhere is this more visible than in relationships formed out of fear rather than choice. When you fear being alone, every connection becomes a necessity. A necessity distorts perception. Most relationships are not built on understanding, but on mutual avoidance of solitude. Two people leaning on each other to escape themselves. This creates intensity, attachment, and eventually exhaustion. When one changes, the balance collapses. But the person who has learned solitude enters relationships differently. They are not there to be completed. They are not there to be saved. They bring themselves whole. This changes the entire dynamic. There is less pressure, less demand, less unspoken expectation. Connection becomes voluntary, not urgent. Gracian believed that the wise man keeps his inner independence even among others. This does not mean withdrawal or indifference. It means discernment, knowing when to engage and when to step back, knowing when to speak and when silence is more powerful. Solitude teaches this rhythm. Without it, people overshare, overcommit, overexplain. They give away access to their inner world too easily and then wonder why they feel depleted. Boundaries are not learned in crowds. They are learned alone. When you are comfortable with yourself, you stop needing constant agreement. You can sit with difference without feeling threatened. You can walk away without resentment. You no longer chase connection to avoid emptiness, so you recognize when a connection is shallow, transactional, or draining. This awareness can feel isolating at first. You begin to see how much interaction is driven by habit rather than meaning. But clarity always reduces quantity before it improves quality. Gracian wrote that reputation follows those who do not chase it. The same applies to respect. People sense when someone is not dependent on approval. There is a quiet authority in those who are self-contained. They do not compete for attention. They do not force presence. And paradoxically, they are often sought out more. Not because they try, but because they are not pulling. They are not hungry. They are not rushing. This steadiness invites trust without effort. This is what society rarely admits. Solitude does not isolate you from others. It filters them. It removes false intimacy and reveals genuine connection. It teaches you to choose people the way you choose thoughts, carefully, deliberately, without panic. And once this standard is set internally, you cannot unlearn it. You no longer fear being alone, so you no longer tolerate what diminishes you. You become selective, not defensive, calm, not closed. And in that calm, your life becomes quieter, clearer, and far more your own. At a certain point, solitude stops being something you practice and becomes something you carry. You can be alone in a room full of people and still remain untouched, not disconnected, not distant, but inwardly anchored. Gracian believed this was the mark of true freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from needing constant reinforcement. When your center is internal, circumstances lose their power to destabilize you. Noise becomes optional. Approval becomes irrelevant. You are no longer pulled apart by every passing influence. This is the state society quietly works against, because a person who does not need constant stimulation cannot be easily distracted. A person who does not crave validation cannot be easily persuaded. A person who does not fear solitude cannot be easily threatened with exclusion. These are the levers most systems rely on. Fear of missing out, fear of being forgotten, fear of standing alone. Solitude dismantles all of them at once. It removes the pressure points. And when pressure points disappear, control weakens. Gracian warned that most people live outwardly, scattered across expectations, obligations, appearances. They are everywhere except within themselves. Solitude gathers you back. It consolidates attention. It sharpens intention. You begin to move with purpose instead of momentum. You stop reacting to every signal. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. Your life simplifies, not because you withdraw from the world, but because you no longer negotiate with it constantly. You choose where to engage and where to remain silent. There is a quiet confidence that emerges from this, not arrogance, not detachment, a grounded presence. You no longer need to announce who you are. You no longer need to defend your choices. Your actions speak with consistency because they are aligned internally. This is what Gracian meant by prudence. Acting from clarity rather than impulse, from understanding rather than urgency. Most never reach this state because it requires time alone without escape, without performance, without distraction. When you embrace solitude fully, you discover something unsettling and liberating at the same time. You were never incomplete. You were simply unacquainted with yourself. The discomfort you feared was not emptiness, but unfamiliarity. And once familiarity forms, fear dissolves. You stop seeking yourself through others. You stop outsourcing your sense of meaning. You stop waiting for permission to be whole. This realization cannot be taken from you because it does not depend on circumstances. This is what society does not want you to know about being alone, that it is not a weakness to overcome, but a foundation to build upon. That the one who can stand alone stands strongest. That silence is not absence, but depth. And that the courage to be alone is the same courage required to live truthfully. When you master solitude, you are no longer shaped by the world around you. You move through it intact, and that, quietly, is the highest form of power.